Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.
What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. If you tuned in on Tuesday, you would have seen me speak with Senator Leo Housakos about Bill C-11. And I walked away from that not really learning anything new, and that's not the senator's fault. I think it's my fault, actually. One of the things that I challenged myself to do since that interview with my guest here tonight is to try to be a reasonable person who looks at the other side of the issue. If there were people inside the Liberal government who thought to themselves, this is a good bill and here's why, I realized that I had never sought those people out to actually listen to what the government might be saying. That might be good ideas that are inside this bill that are surrounded by these ideas that I think happen to be bad. So tonight we have a guest. I consider him to be Canada's kind of foremost expert on this stuff, and I think a lot of people do as well. And so maybe he can, along with the criticisms that this bill rightfully deserves, kind of maybe he doesn't think there's anything good in the bill, but I think he's a more rational person than I am. So I'm sure that there might be something inside that he can point to that says, maybe they're trying to do this. And those are the kind of conversations that I want to start having with things that I don't look at from the other perspective. So here, joining us today to talk about this is Dr. Michael Geist. Michael, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you for coming. I asked Michael before we went on air how his Yom Kippur was, because as an atheist, I have no idea how to ask about religious holidays. So I'm like, how was it? And you're like, I haven't eaten anything in 30 hours, whatever it was. So I'm glad you had a good holiday, I guess. Is that how it works? But my intro, hastily delivered as it was, I am sort of wondering if I am missing anything here that I could say about this bill that's positive. So I kind of want to open with that, if you don't mind, to just sort of like let me know what I'm missing that might be positive inside this bill, because I've only been looking at it from the side of criticism. So is there anything in the bill that we can point to that's like, this is a productive way of handling something?
Okay, well, that's not necessarily how I thought we'd start, but that's all good. Listen, I think the intent, or at least the stated intent of the bill, I think is good. There's nothing, not is there nothing wrong. I think it is appropriate to say that the Broadcasting Act has been around for a very long time, about just over 30 years now, and it's in need of an update. And certainly, the world has changed. The internet and internet streaming services are obviously a much bigger part of the landscape, are a big part of the landscape, and didn't exist when this was first drafted. So I think the mission of seeking to update Canadian law is a good idea. I think to the extent to which this bill has put the question of Canadian content rules and what they are and what they are seeking to achieve, I think it's a very good thing. It's another long overdue discussion. It's one that certain groups are trying to avoid. I think they'd like to put that toothpaste back in the tube a little bit and not engage in that discussion, because I think once you do, you come to the realization that the rules don't achieve what many of the stated objectives are, or at least what people think the objectives for CanCon are. Those are really good, but I think once you start delving into the specifics in the legislation, it becomes tougher and tougher to support, quite frankly, because I don't think the legislation achieves what the government says it has set out to achieve. And I think that their response, both in the previous bill in C-10 and then even more now with C-11, has largely been to stick their head in the sand and say they don't want to hear the critics. And frankly, it's even worse now. Now it's to treat anybody who comes with, oftentimes, I think, constructive criticism, to say somehow they're the enemy and they seek to discredit or not listen to them whatsoever.
Dean Blundell, the Dean Blundell show, joins us now. Hey, Dean. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. I just came for the Geist. That's all I'm here for. Michael Geist.
Michael, we're going to get to Dean because I know you have a bunch of questions as well. I wanted to take a look at something that you wrote about some of the witnesses that have come forward to testify at committee. The headline on your site of one of your pieces says, "When government investigates its critics, why the Bill C-11 witness intimidation issue is about far more than strategically timed leak." I read a bit about this, and I talked to the senator about this a little bit as well. Can you take us through what happened? Because I don't want to butcher it. And I find it to be a manipulative way to take a process in Parliament, or in the Senate in this case, and create theater out of it that isn't honest and seems like entrapment almost. Can you explain what you meant by witness intimidation?
Yeah. So I mean, and when you asked, what's good and what hasn't been so good with this legislation, I think process has been one of the really bad things, and this is, I think, a good example of that. So we'd have to go back even to the spring. The hearings were taking place in the House of Commons around this bill, and as you know, many digital creators have really begun to speak out on this. In fact, as we're recording this just a few hours ago, Digital First Canada, this organization that has tried to become a bit of an umbrella for those views, has put forward a letter that brings together creators that collectively, I think, have something like over 200 million subscribers, wide reach, and they're all very concerned about what this bill might mean for their livelihood. And so, in any event, they weren't included the first time round when when it was Bill C-10, Bill C-11. They began to get at least a seat at the table. Although I think that those views, frankly, have been largely ignored because they've been really concerned about what this bill does. The executive director of that organization, Digital First Canada, someone by the name of Scott Benzie, for many years running something known as the Buffer Festival, which has been a festival in Toronto that brings together YouTube videos and many kind of a lot of online creativity. And so he's there obviously to raise concerns around digital first creators. And one of the Liberal MPs, Chris Biddle, who there's a whole separate story with Chris Biddle and myself from over the summer, but we could park that to the side. Biddle proceeds to really use those 5 minutes to interrogate Benzie about his funding, about the organization. Benzie says, listen, there's been some support from TikTok and YouTube, which isn't particularly surprising. His members are on TikTok and YouTube. And he treats this the Liberal MP Biddle as some sort of major story. There's conflicts here and the like. I mean, I think it's notable that when creators speak up for themselves and they get support from organizations and they're critical of the bill, somehow there's a conflict. When these myriad of organizations who are benefiting from this legislation, or really would benefit from these kind of handouts, somehow there's no conflicts there, or not even an attempt to drill down as to whether there might be, they've got some they would stand to benefit from the legislation financially. In any event, that's what takes place. It's done. It turns out that months later, Biddle, together with several of the other Liberal MPs on that committee, though not all, notably one, Anthony Housefather, took one look at this, I guess, and said, no way am I getting involved. But they file a letter with the lobbying commissioner saying, we'd like you to investigate this organization, the role that the tech companies have. We think that there may be something here. It's not a public investigation, so nobody knows about the letter, but Benzie says that he's cleared of anything. It's a non-issue, and everybody knows, and everybody, I guess, associated with it knew it was a non-issue. The night before Benzie is scheduled to appear before the Senate, a story is leaked to the Globe and Mail, in which this investigation is revealed. There is nothing there. The commissioners already found that there's nothing there, but it's there. And it's the timing, as one senator, Paula Simon, said, stinks. It really pretty clearly it's dirty pool. And I think you can make the case that it's witness intimidation. We've seen now, both in the House and the Senate, requests to the speaker of both of those bodies to say, hey, this feels like witness intimidation. In the House speaker said, listen, this is a Senate hearing. I don't have jurisdiction, although I'm not sure that there's evidence here to support witness intimidation. We'll see how the Senate plays out. There too, they've said part of their concern and their focus was on the timing of the leak. And to say, listen, we're not about to compel a journalist with the Globe and Mail who reported it to reveal sources or anything like that. And without that, it's hard to make that case. To wrap up, I've been going on probably a bit too long, but to wrap up on this, the post that I put forward was to say, listen, I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. It's not about the leak. It's about the fact that there was an organized effort, undoubtedly coming out of the heritage minister's office, that brought together several liberal MPs that sought to investigate one of their most vocal critics. And
And
that, I think,
yeah,
is the real problem here.
was it true that the Liberals advised that witness to be a registered lobbyist and then trashed him for being a lobbyist?
Well, he is. I'm not sure if he even is a registered lobbyist, but if he is, they may have said, "Listen, have you registered?" Whether they advised or not, listen, I mean, the law is the law. You can go to the lobbyist commissioner and others and try to identify whether or not there's a requirement. Benzie's gone to the lobbyist commissioner, as I understand it, and repeatedly have been assured that nothing he has done is offside of the legislation. The organization isn't offside of the legislation. And I mean, in some ways, for anyone who's followed this, they've seen any number of groups that are actively lobbying either directly or behind the scenes. But it is only when the tech companies are involved that the government jumps up and down and says and screams intimidation, as actually the heritage minister Pablo Rodriguez said today. Google is trying to intimidate people. Why? By expressing concern about where this legislation will go. I think of the lobby groups who are literally telling the heritage minister, "Hey, we want to register this kind of. We want to ensure that there's regulation for this kind of content. We want to have the scope extend far and wide." And nobody within the government side says boo. And yet tech companies get involved and suddenly there's big conflicts. Your voice doesn't count. And yet when they say your voice doesn't count, which is effectively what they're doing, we're talking about, thousands, potentially millions of Canadians who are using these platforms to express themselves, sometimes to launch businesses and the like. And their livelihood, as they said today in their letter, is put at risk by this kind of legislation. They should, the idea that they shouldn't be able to speak out or that somehow there's any sort of connection with the tech companies is frankly abhorrent. And the idea now that the government takes the position that anybody that does that is worthy of investigation, as we saw from these Liberal MPs, should scare a lot of us, because you don't, and this is what Housefather recognized, you don't as a government move down the path of saying, we think our critics are so bad on this issue that we actually want them investigated.
Dean?
Yeah, that was that letter that had been shopped around, as you pointed out in your article at michaelgeist.ca. Bill C-11 goes off the rails amid charges of witness intimidation, bullying by government MPs. You laid it out pretty simply, right? Anthony Housefather was the only cat that didn't sign this letter that you speak of, and it looked like, and if you read the article, I read everything you put out, and it's interesting because I get this really very calm tone. But it's also, you're what you're trying to alert people to is, hey, listen, if the government is asking for witnesses to come forward to talk about these bills, Bill C-11, or Bill C-10, or Bill C-18, and when these people do come forward and they say, here are the problems as we see it from a digital first perspective, in the case of Scott Benzie, it seemed like there was a real effort there to discredit him and his funding. And when you look and read your article and you read the tea leaves and you kind of look at the situation, it makes you nervous for anybody that is in a digital agency, anybody that has a digital property. It makes me incredibly nervous because if they can do that to somebody who they've asked to appear or asked to speak on behalf of content creators in a digital space, just to get this through, it makes me wonder, A, what they'll do to us and why they're doing it like this. Why are they intimidating people like this? What is the end goal? You would think that to bring people on side, specifically a public that is more and more engaged in a digital space, you would think that they wouldn't want to be doing this ahead of trying to get this thing pushed through. So I guess the question is why? Why aren't they listening to people in the digital space? Why are they giving no opportunity for people to talk about how this algorithmic change that they say that they want to bring in when it comes to Bill C-11, why are they not listening to those people, and why are they intimidating other people? What are they trying to hide in your estimation?
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for those questions. I think you're asking the right ones, and at a certain level, it's a bit inexplicable. On the issue, for example, of whether this covers user content and whether algorithms will be affected. I think it's fairly clear from the Senate hearings, which have frankly been miles better than what we saw in the House. Once you remove some of the theatrics and you get into people who are actually there to listen and are not as politically aligned. Even if there are senators on this committee that are supportive and critical, but just about all of them ask good questions. And there's none of that theater, and they get to the heart of some of these issues. I think it's those hearings have reached the point that there is at this stage no question that user content is regulated, no matter how many times Pablo Rodriguez seeks to say otherwise. And algorithms are affected, no matter how many times Pablo Rodriguez chooses to say otherwise. And that's been confirmed not just by expert witnesses, but by those that are directly affected, by the chair of the CRTC. It's all there. And so it raised the question, why persist in this theater, in this misleading behavior, and seek to in many ways try to intimidate or ensure that some of those voices don't come forward? I think in some ways because they have just latched on so hard to that bill and are so desperate to try to get it through that they are willing, I think, in many ways, to sacrifice so many of sort of the fundamental values that I would hope the government would have around trying to make good policy. This ought not to be a particularly partisan piece of legislation. And the fixes that have been proposed, which I should note include ensuring that companies like YouTube still pay. So if this was just about trying to ensure that there's, people are getting a dime out of YouTube, we're getting some money out of them, quite frankly, we're already at that point. Those companies have said, we're fine with legislation that ensures that we're going to make some sort of contribution. But hands off the regulation piece of the content of our users. And we can distinguish, I think, between telling a Netflix, let's say, we want you to do something on your curated service from a YouTube or a TikTok. And yet the government doesn't even try to, frankly, I haven't even heard them try to justify it. They simply deny. And it makes, as someone who does follow this closely, regularly blogs, tweets, etc., about it, it makes it pretty tough because you see what's in the legislation, you see what people are saying, and the response is to sort of say, well, no, the sky isn't blue in this world, it's red, and that's just that. And how are you supposed to respond to that? I don't even know, to tell you the truth.
Do you think that's why it's funny? In that one article that you put up a couple of weeks ago on that they were referring to about Scott Benzie, you made mention, you obviously, Chris Biddle, and if you paid attention to people watching, you paid attention to Michael Geist, you follow him on Twitter. That Chris Biddle, the parliamentary secretary, Canadian Heritage Parliamentary Secretary Chris Biddle, who was on TV talking about Hockey Canada yesterday. It's amazing how you can have so many faces when you're a parliamentary secretary. But this is the same guy that I think tried to do the same thing to you that he did to Benzie, but in a more direct and very disgusting way when he said you were a racist and a bully.
Yeah. And that I should note is not a C11 or C18 issue, but was a rather.
But it's a you issue because you're the foremost expert in the world of copyright and digital law. I mean, it kind of fits, does it not? In my estimation, it did anyway.
Well, I
discredit the critic kind of thing.
I think there certainly was that. I mean, this to me was an astonishing experience where it arises not from these bills, but rather from the government having funded an anti-Semite using as part of its anti-hate program. And for me, deeply troubling. Started this mentioning that it's been the Jewish high holidays have just completed, and it was terrible to me, not just that this took place, but the reaction or non-reaction of government officials. And in fact, very many of them said absolutely nothing at all. And we know that this is a government and these are MPs that on many other issues are very quick to jump in and say stuff, as I think in many instances they should. But when it's anti-Semitism, somehow there was a lot of silence. And there was silence as well from Pablo Rodriguez, who was not directly responsible for this program, but is the Minister of Canadian Heritage. He speaks out a lot on issues related to online hate. And to have remained silent around this, I thought, sent a terrible message. And so I said so on a number of occasions. And Biddle ultimately had enough of that and said that either I was motivated by my hate for Pablo Rodriguez, or perhaps it was the way that the other responsible minister, Ahmed Hussein, who is a Black Somali Canadian, looks. And so the reference was either I was motivated by hate or racism. I responded by saying I was a grandson of Holocaust survivors and didn't think it was too much to ask the Minister of Canadian Heritage to say something about about his department funding an anti-Semite, and yet here I get called a racist. Biddle proceeded to delete the tweet about 24 hours later and apologize, but I felt that apology was a bit short-lived, as the next day he gives an interview to his local paper and said that he was bullied by a bully and baited into the tweet. I had somehow bullied him
Wow.
into calling me a racist.
Yeah.
And so I don't take that apology to be particularly sincere, but it does highlight, I think, not just that I think this MP's conduct was abhorrent and frankly, inexcusable. But there is a tendency, I think, amongst many on that committee and more broadly within that department, to view anyone who is critical of this legislation as the enemy. And it's moved away from just trying to get good policy into anyone who dares to criticize, either is targeted with these intimidation tactics or is seen as really the enemy, where there are no real limits. Anything you do to try to take them down is seen to be fair game.
That's
It's
why
amazing
Dean's
too, because
question
it's a
was-
government of Jamesy. It's a government that prides themselves on all that woke shit, as everybody talks about. It's amazing to me because this is the inclusive government, and you got a guy out there. You have a government out there that's basically decided that they're going to decide how things work when it comes to freedom of speech and when it comes to copyright law, when it comes to algorithms. They're going to decide how we're going to proceed. They're going to decide how content looks, who gets to see what. And in the process, when someone raises their hand, like Scott Benzie or yourself, who is an academic in that world, a legal scholar in that world, someone who is looked to around the globe for direction when it comes to this, and they're doing it to you too, just so they can get this through. That's why I find it so incredible. It doesn't matter how unbiased, how professional, how intellectual you are, they'll sick the dogs just so they can get this thing through, because to me, it means that there's something else at stake, and I don't know what that is, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, is it just the fact that these guys don't want to have to use actual law when it comes to hate speech? Are they afraid of attacking people or going after people on the internet and the web that speak poorly about them? It just, to me, there's something else at play here, and I can't quite put my finger on it, Michael, and I don't know what it is. But speaking to what had happened to you, it was disgusting to watch, and just another notch in that bedpost of mine where I decide who I'm going to vote for at night and who I'm not going to vote for at night. And I was embarrassed for you, and I'm grateful to know you too. The strength with which you kind of went through that and maintained your composure. I thought it was incredible, because I thought what they did to you was disgusting.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. And listen, I felt the same way. And it was I have to say, it was a little bit surreal to kind of, it's one thing to be the target of certain things. I think it's unfortunate, but it's come with the territory on a number of these issues. People do get more personal than I think they should around what is, at the end of the day, pretty nerdy policymaking. But this was something different, and it was deeply troubling. And it's an area that I must admit I hadn't spoken out about as much. And I did a podcast actually with Anthony Housefather, and said, listen, it's not the thing I've covered in the past, but this made me realize that there are too many people who are content sometimes to stay on the sidelines, or in the case of Chris Biddle, defend people who stay on the sidelines, which is what he was doing in the case of Pablo Rodriguez, who I should note has still not released a public statement on this issue. He gave an interview to one reporter. They got some coverage on it. Repeated requests to say, well, what exactly did he say? What's the statement? Have always gone unanswered. It's pretty shameful in my view.
I feel like we're looking at a liberal caucus that is really undisciplined right now. I think they miss Erwin Kotler. I think they miss having statesmen like that, people that were in the House for a long time, to sort of to serve as an example just by being there in a lot of ways. One of the things that I wanted to say before about Dean's question and why it was so good is because taking a look at what their motivations are and not knowing what that could be, it forces people like me to sort of look at the milieu or whatever of the media fund and Bill C-10, Bill C-11, Bill C-18. And the more that I think of it, the more that it strikes me as just a way to win elections. It strikes me as all these pieces, if you put it together, create this idea or this construct that they're going for. They want a friendly media, so they have the big media fund it's going to be worth over $1 billion, I think now. Then they have Bill C-11, which is, a lot of people think, a favor to legacy media. Are these pieces that I'm putting together that don't have square pegs, and I'm trying to stick a round or square peg in a round hole, or I mean, I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but when you take a look at all of these things and you put them together, doesn't it feel like they're just trying to figure out a way to remain in power?
Yeah, of course. And I don't think you have to be conspiratorial to think that. I think that I frankly
I love how
be all
fast you
polite.
answered that. Of course, James.
I think they're
should've
being
just-
pretty. I don't think they're being particularly secret about that. Yes, that's exactly what they are trying to do. They believe that this is the path to re-election, and in the case of C11, I think a lot of it has to do with Quebec-based lobbyists that have really continued to insist on, let's say, things like user content regulation, and that I think is probably in a world of that is difficult to explain, that's probably the best explanation for why they continue to take the position on that bill that they do. On C18, which has not yet got the attention that it deserves, and I think the government's pretty happy about that. It is an astonishing piece of legislation. We may have talked about it a little bit at the periphery in the past, but
Yeah,
this
what
is
are the
this
more
bill that-
astonishing points of it? Yeah.
this is the bill that wants Google and Facebook to pay for the link for them linking to news sites. The idea that where you search, where a news site uploads something onto Facebook, or where you run a search for a news story and it sends you over to the underlying news site, that somehow that's the responsibility of Google and Facebook to pay for it. Which I think is really reverse of how most people conceive of the media ecosystem, where there's value in having people link to you. That's how you get ads and subscribers. And yet they're saying that, no, you need to pay for that. It's not just that. We learned today through the parliamentary budget officer how much, at least that office thinks they are going to be paying for all of this. And it is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, the News Media Canada says they think it will be 33% of their total journalist costs will be funded by the internet platforms. You tie in 25% that they get in labor tax credits, and they believe that that their costs for journalism are going to be a fraction of the overall cost. They literally think that, and they're quoted saying they think that's a pretty reasonable deal for us and the platforms. A third of our journalist costs should be paid because they are linking out to these organizations. This is insane. And
Lunacy.
it's not, and we should recognize that what it does, it first creates perpetual dependence on the platforms. These companies will ultimately only exist because of large internet platforms, because it's basically an acknowledgement we can't pay our own bills. It forces everyone to participate in this. Even if you don't believe in this, you can't compete against someone who's got a third of their bills being paid for by Google and Facebook. And what will it say to everybody else who's got links? Somehow there's just like this big free for all. Your links, people who link to you, it's worth a third of your costs. And what's going to stop everybody else? I run a health site. I think it's really useful. I think Google is generating ad revenue off of those links. I think Google should pay me a third of my costs for running this site, just like everyone else. What will the internet look like in a world in which the Canadian government creates a system in which they say a third of your underlying costs ought to be paid for these large platforms that are actually driving traffic to you? It's mind-blowing.
What would happen if these companies said no? Like, I'm thinking of the Australia thing.
We don't want the 58% increase to our bottom line for doing nothing. No, we don't want it.
Right. But
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, what if Google, Meta, and Twitter were like, yeah, you can't manipulate our algorithms to suit your legislation. Sorry, we're not going to do that. What would happen?
Yeah, well, so there's actually an algorithm issue there too, because ironically, the legislation also says that Google, Facebook can't play with their algorithms to prioritize or deprioritize, because what they want to do essentially must carry. You've got to carry Canadian news as part of your service, which at a certain level, one can understand. Well, sure, we want to ensure there's Canadian news, but those companies will tell you that one of the things they try to do is try to deprioritize misinformation and low value news. And if you're going to create liability anytime you do that, that actually runs the risk of having more misinformation, not less. But to answer the specific question around, can they walk away? you know, the legislation is designed to basically force them, if you carry any sort of news, you got to sign up for this thing. And it's mandatory arbitration in order to do so. I think it's possible that they say, well, listen, this is just, we can't live in a world, and no business could live in a world where the expectation is you pay a third of my costs. Not even a dollar figure here. It's like, basically it's a third of my cost. The incentives, of course, for the news organizations are, okay, I think I'm going to double my costs in the next year and hire a whole lot of people, because I know that I got a third of that being paid for by someone else, and another quarter of it is being paid by Canadian taxpayers through various tax incentive programs that we've got. And so why wouldn't you do that? I mean, if you're a Google or a Facebook, it's not clear to me how you run your business when there's that almost unlimited liability, because it's based essentially on costs as opposed to an actual value estimation for these kinds of links. And so it's possible they walk away. It's even more likely that they challenge it. This thing will be challenged at the trade level, it'll be challenged at the international treaty level, and it'll be challenged in the courts. And when you look at the dollars involved, it's pretty clear that there won't be much hesitation to spend big dollars appealing this and fighting this at every court level, because they're quite literally envisioning hundreds of millions of dollars every year.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question, James. Sorry if I might just
no, please. I think Michael has to
in.
go soon, so I think this might be the last question.
Just one question about C18. First of all, C11, we know C11 is a joke. C18 also is a joke. How is it possible that media in this country, traditional media, has been able to convince our government, when they own it all, like 3 or 4 companies own everything? How is it possible that they could convince the government not only do they own everything and get to set internet rates, mobile rates, how is it that they've been able to then make the government go to these big tech companies and say, by the way, not only are you giving us billions a year in subsidies to stay afloat, even though we're incredibly profitable and we're paying dividends, but we also need you to get them to pay us a whole bunch of money. How is that possible? Because at every turn that you've explained this whole thing to me in Bill C-18, everything that I've read, it's about media in this country working hand in hand with certain lobbyists and groups to be able to shut out everybody else, penalize everybody else, and get other people to pay for their mistakes and their failures. How has that been possible? Or am I reading this wrong?
I don't think you're reading it wrong. And I should have mentioned, just to ensure that your head explodes, that it's not just the post medias of the world that are eligible for this. Bell is eligible for this. The CBC is eligible for this. So
CBC, which is government funded, is eligible for more government subsidies. Is that correct?
They're eligible for platform subsidies.
They don't get enough money, guys. I mean,
they get CBC's eligible. Bell runs local radio stations. They're eligible for this too. So it's not even just the newspapers. It's bigger than that. How have they convinced? How have they convinced of it? I mean, I just think that this is, they view this as an easy political winner. To come back to James's earlier question, is this really just about trying to win elections? Yeah, it's really just about trying to win elections. This one is even simpler. The belief is you win elections by having local media out there and supporting you. They believe local media needs to survive to help get that message out. And they look at this and they say, we can funnel money to help these businesses, and it's not going to cost Canadian taxpayers. All we have to do is get these platforms to pay for it. It's like win all over the place. We get to demonize the platforms. We get to say that we're supporting our local community papers. And it serves the role of helping enhance our presence within our local ridings. This is great. This is their view. This is great on every level. Should be noted that in many of these communities, there are digital news organizations that have spread it out over the last number of years. Many of them are deeply concerned by this legislation because they've found a business model that they think can work digitally. And they, as we've been talking about, have no choice but to jump in with this, because you can't compete if your main competitor oftentimes in these communities is the CBC. It's not just that you're competing now against a taxpayer supported organization. You're competing against one that's got now even millions and millions of dollars being funneled from Google and Facebook as well.
Just before you go, what is the ETA on the, like, when committee is over and it expects to get royal assent if it does? When is that supposed to happen?
Okay, so on C11, as you've been talking about, it's in the Senate, and you spoke to the chair of the Senate committee. There is apparently a deal on that will that they will vote on that by November. So towards the middle to end of next month, I would expect we'd see several more weeks of hearings, and then they will move to a clause by clause review. But the expectation is that we'll get out of the Senate in November, and we'll have to see if the Senate makes changes, if this committee decides that there were some things they want to change and perhaps the new content, then it would go back to the House. And then we'd have to see whether the government accepts it or not and can ping pong a little bit. So that would delay things further. It's possible it gets royal assent by the end of the year. Certainly, if the Senate approves it in its current form, that's what will happen. On C-18, it's only before committee right now. There have only been two hearings so far. I appeared in the first one. And there are at this stage no other hearings scheduled. I think there's an expectation that they will have some, but they haven't scheduled anything yet. They did the Hockey Canada stuff earlier this week. They're actually doing the anti-hate stuff tomorrow. They're off next week. It's certainly possible we'll see some additional hearings later in October. But just to show you how the government wants to rush this thing through, the Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez has yet to give a speech on this bill in the House of Commons or before committee. He never spoke to it in the House, and they cut off debate, sent it to committee. He's yet to appear on it before committee.
It's fine.
Crazy.
It's fine.
Crazy.
Everything's fine, Michael. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Free speech is in good hands. Everything's going to be all right. Everybody's
Dr.
got a
Michael
shot at this.
Geist, University of Ottawa professor, and my favorite internet policy law guy. So listen, I'm going to ask you to come back. So, because I don't get angry that much anymore, but every time you leave, I'm a little bit angrier. So I think it's good therapy for me to let it out once in a while, but we appreciate the time that you took. And everyone should go to Michael Geist. Is it michaelgeist.ca?
michaelgeist.ca.
michaelgeist.ca.
And his podcast is called Law Bites. It's actually really, really good. I don't say actually, like everybody should be surprised it's not good. But it's something that I listen to every time I see Law Bites pop out. I'm like, yes, good. And it's like food for your brain. You'll understand how this whole thing works. He does such a wonderful job of making it pedestrian for Lugans like me. But you're terrific. And the way that you break it down, I'd encourage you to download and subscribe to his podcast called Law Bites. It's excellent.
Agreed.
Awesome.
Thanks, Michael.
Awesome. I appreciate that. It's really good to see both of you guys. It's been a little while.
Great to see you.
Take
too.
care.
Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Dr. Geist. Talk to you soon.
Michael Geist. Wow, he's so
What a
smart.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's smart. You know what I think? It's funny because I like to layman term this kind of stuff. What I think Trudeau's doing, this is what I think his government's doing with Bill C-11, C-18. They're trying to stroke traditional media into helping them get reelected. They're trying to stay relevant in the eyes of as some people call it, the woke mob, but in the group of the people who just hate everything, citizens against. And the other thing he's trying to do, which I find fascinating, is he's trying to avoid taking on hate speech when it comes to him and people online. He's trying to avoid the legal trigger. So what he's doing is he's trying to end run everybody by dumping free speech into this fucking cauldron of stupidity and then saying, hey, listen, we've got bills for that. I got to take you offline now. You can't fake threaten people, or you can't do this, or you can't speak poorly of this guy. And that's because that's what this is. That's what Bill C-11 is. It's like the German shit where they're like, if you feel like someone might say something bad about you in their next tweet, you can report it and they'll take that shit down. Right? It's fucking unbelievable to me when you look at what C-11 is and what they're trying to do. And not only that, how they're trying to hurt content providers in this Canada by changing things algorithmically. It is bizarre to me what they're doing. So that's why when I said to him, like, what are they trying to get at? What are they trying to do? I think they're up to something else, and I can't figure it out. And I think about protect themselves and trying to convince the rest of the world that they've managed to figure out a way to make the internet nicer in Canada, which will never fucking happen. Ever.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I was surprised that Michael said, yeah, that's probably what they're doing when I asked him if they're just trying to win elections. Because if Michael Geist says, yeah, that's what they're trying to do, and you look at everything through that lens, then I think what they're trying to do with Bill C-11 and Bill C-18 is trying to get people, and you can see someone in the comments, someone saying, what happens when someone decides that Ontario Proud is news? When I see that, I understand what Pasta Gabe is getting at. But the thing is that I don't want to live in a country where the government decides that because Ontario Proud is a repugnant, tabloid sensationalist organization, that they're not allowed to say things on the internet. I think that we have to come to grips with something here. And I'm always quoting Chomsky when I say this, because I asked him once, what is the best way to fight disinformation? And he said, the best way to fight bad ideas is with good ideas. Because once the government comes in and starts deciding for people, because no one ever thinks long term, eventually there's going to be a conservative government in Canada utilizing Bill C-11, and then they're going to decide what's news. Mm-hmm. And they're going to say that Politico is not news, or they're going to say that, hell, they might even say the CBC is not news, or what have you. And so this long-term vision of what the internet could be, and copyright law and the CRTC and all that, could blow up in their faces the second that a conservative prime minister takes office.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, totally. 100%.
And that's how I felt. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't disagree with you. I think sanitizing bad ideas. I think everybody should be allowed to see anything they want. I think we unfortunately live in a world now where social media can actually disrupt that brain, and it can make people with bad ideas radicalized, ridiculous, and stupid, and dangerous. And we're seeing it now. We see it all the time. I mean, the MGTOW stuff with Pierre Poilievre and those YouTube videos. You know, these
he was just shocked.
Yeah, can't believe it's happening. Wow, really?
My favorite was when he goes like this. He's like, "Yeah, the tags that were there, they were there for 4 years ago, and grocery prices are really high."
Let's get back to the price of kumquats, can we? Yeah, of course you'd want to get back to the price of kumquats when you've been found out to be virtue signaling to fucking white supremacists, dude. So like that's the problem. The problem is that there are nuances, and there are little bits and pieces in the internet that make it not just about, a website with bad ideas. It's about activating people. It's about psychologically hacking people's brains with algorithms and, messaging and inflammatory language. Like, we don't live in that time where everything should be in the public square anymore. There should be some intolerance for tolerance to some extent. Like, we should have the ability to be able to say, you know what? Canada Proud is a terrible organization with shitbags that run it, like Jeff Bolignol, who are openly trying to court white supremacists. Jeff Bolignol himself is the fucking king of the incels in this country, and he runs an organization and a network that is dedicated to making this country a more hateful and shitty place through a series of lies, catcalling, and dog whistles in the digital world that not many people understand. And he does, right? He does. And so guys like you and I, well, I know, dude, he used to own it. He's like, literally, we are being kettled by terrible people on the internet parading around as real. Well, now the government gets to decide who's real, right? And so when a guy like, and this is why I'm stuck in the middle with some of this stuff too. When a guy like Jeff Bolignol gets taken off the internet because he's literally using the internet to sow hatred for money on his own personal and political gain, then I'm okay with it. Like, I would be way okay if someone just said, you know what, we're going to take you right the fuck off the internet. You can't be on Twitter anymore. You can't be disseminating information anymore, because the information he disseminates is expressed and for the purpose of hurting people. Same thing with Pierre Poilievre. Same thing with Rebel News. Like, Rebel News, my God, how the fuck is anybody like? And listen, it exists for people who are literally mentally handicapable in this world. People who don't have a good idea, people whose responses are terrible, people who do not have the ability to reason. And that is like literally a terrorist organization parading around as a propaganda news service. And it is just horseshit. Like, they make news up. They create fake news, fundraise off that fake news, use that fundraising to make every country they operate in a much shittier place. I think those guys should not be allowed to be on the internet as well. And it's not because I look at them as competition. Fuck, I could care less about the money that they make. I know what we do. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we have a problem when it comes to information on the internet, and stupid people are the end result, and they are activated by that problem. And that problem is not what our problems used to be 15, 20, 30 years ago when the internet wasn't hacking idiots' brains. So, having said that, I kind of like Bill C-11 for that, but I also know that there are 20,000 other things in there that are absolute garbage.
You know, it's kind of funny that we're a network that makes money off of selling T-shirts that says "Go fuck yourself," and we can still look down our noses at Rebel News.
To be fair, I did take those shirts off.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, the fuck line's gone. It's totally gone. I'm like, we can't keep selling. We had like 18 shirts on there that had the word fuck in it. I'm like, they can't do that anymore. Anyway, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you. And really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on with Geist as well, buddy. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you for coming. And hopefully you can stick around and watch. I haven't smoked any weed all day. I have John Spencer at 10:30, urban warfare expert, whose strategies were adopted by the Ukrainian military in order to train their civilian force. And I'm going to need another couple of Red Bulls because I'm drug free, except for weed.
For you, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's weird that I don't have Adderall to keep me up and masturbating and and reading something. I don't know.
Oh, it's called living a sober-ish lifestyle, dude. It's
enjoy
it.
It's caffeine and weed. That's it.
That's all I got. Boy, that's you've turned into like an actual Kensington Market hippie now. Good for you. Caffeine and weed.
So I might as well. Oh, by the way, before you go, I should have given you this before when you did your Michelle Rempel segment.
Yeah,
that she hasn't always been exactly a darling of decorum in the House.
What's she doing there?
This is the Senate scandal, and this is like Stephen Harper made some sort of point where like I don't know, he's like, well, the liberals did this once or whatever, and that was her hooting and hollering, and as you can see, she's the only one. And if you look at the clip is hilarious. I don't have it because I got that picture like 6 years ago, but the clip is just like Harper dissing someone. I guess she expected the rest of the caucus to be like, yeah, right on. But it was just her. And everyone just kind of looked at her when she was done. She's like, what?
And representative from Calgary Nose Hill, Michelle Rempel Garner, ladies and gentlemen.
She blocked me like 5 years ago.
Yeah, she blocks everybody. It's fucking amazing that none of these guys block me. None of them.
I have 585 people that have blocked me. I found out the other day.
Yeah, dude, I did a podcast today with 3 guys. 3 of them had blocked you.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a good ratio, though.
Yeah, I've realized I've blocked 1,585 people.
Holy fuck! Are you serious?
Yeah, they're all bots, though. They're all anonymous bots. I haven't blocked any humans yet.
I've only blocked like 4 people. I don't want to be the block guy.
No, I go for it. No, I could care less. It's about the experience, right?
Yeah.
No one's going to control my experience in this life. I'll control it myself. Go fuck
That's
yourself.
True.
And that's the thing I do. Only anonymous bots. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
I wasn't trying to rush you there, but thank you.
All right.
Dean Blundell, everybody. Thanks, buddy. I'll see you soon.
Man. Talk to you soon.
That was Dean Blundell earlier. That was Dr. Michael Geist. And I am James DeFiore, and I'm going to get off air now so that I can take a shower again. I've taken 2 showers in the last 24 hours. I'm going to take my 3rd because it wakes me up. John Spencer tonight at 10:30. And if you are not staying up for that one, please don't forget that tomorrow I have Ann Schwartz. Ann is an author of the book Monster. I gotta go find the title of the book. I feel so bad when I do it like that. She's the author of the book Monster, the true story of the Jeffrey Dahmer murders. She is the reporter who in 1991 was the first person to actually break the story of Jeffrey Dahmer's killings. So that should be fun. And it's actually good, well timed with the Netflix documentary that came out. I don't think it's been released in the United States yet because it came out in Canada. But I did see Anne post something about how the premiere for the Dahmer documentary is tomorrow, which is why I asked her to come on the show tomorrow, and I got lucky and she said yes. So that's tomorrow night at 7, Ann Schwartz. But tonight, John Spencer, urban warfare expert, at 10:30. So we will see you then. And yeah, have a good night, everybody.
Blackballed. 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 Blackballed.